A humiliating toast at a family dinner shatters 19-year old Noah's fragile silence, forcing him into the gaze of Mark Whittaker, an older man with secrets hidden in a house by the lake. Sent there under the shadow of a deal made by his father, Noah finds himself trapped between shame and desire, drawn to Mark's quiet authority, yet terrified of what it awakens inside him. Their first charged touch sparks a dangerous intimacy, but the world quickly intrudes. Daniel, his sister's cruel boyfriend, uncovers the truth and threatens exposure. A crumpled check reveals Noah was bought and placed in Mark's care, like a burden to be managed. Fury explodes, loyalties fracture, and Noah tears the proof into the lake, only to realize nothing can erase the lies binding them together. Now hunted by his father's control, Daniel's blackmail, and the haunting pull of Mark's stare, Noah stands at the edge of ruin. Will he run back to the cage he escaped, or surrender to the fire that could consume him? The dining room buzzed with laughter, glasses clinking under the soft yellow light of the chandelier. The table was crowded with plates of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and casseroles that smelled like every Sunday dinner the boy had endured since childhood. But tonight was different. Tonight was his sister's birthday, and the whole family was gathered, uncles, cousins, neighbors who felt like relatives whether he wanted them to or not. He sat there, shoulders tight, forcing a polite smile that barely clung to his lips. He had hoped to blend into the background, to get through the night without being noticed. The toast started innocently enough. His uncle, Red, faced from too many beers, raised his glass and launched into a story about the good old days. Everyone listened politely, laughing in the right places, waiting for the cake. But then, with a smirk that made his stomach churn, the uncle turned toward him. "And here's to our boy," the man said loudly, lifting his glass higher. "May he finally bring home a girl friend one of these days, or hell, maybe even a boyfriend, if that's more his thing." The words dropped like a stone in water. For a split second there was silence. Then laughter erupted around the table. His cousins slapped each other's shoulders. His aunt hid her grin behind her wineglass. Even his mother gave a nervous little chuckle, as if to soften the cruelty. Heat flooded his face. He gripped the edge of his chair until his knuckles went white, praying the ground would open beneath him. His chest tightened, breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the first time, never the first, never the last, but tonight the sting was sharper because every eye was on him. He felt stripped, exposed, like some grotesque secret had been dragged into the open air. He wanted to speak, to tell them to shut up, to scream that it wasn't funny. But the words tangled inside him, heavy and useless. His father cleared his throat, muttering something about just a joke, but the damage was done. The laughter still echoed in his ears, cruel and sticky, refusing to fade. And then, in the middle of his shame, the dining room door creaked open. A man stepped inside, taller than most of the people at the table, dressed not for family comfort, but with the quiet authority of someone used to commanding attention. His presence alone silenced a few giggles, though not completely. He wasn't a stranger. The boy had seen him once or twice before, a friend of his father's business circle, maybe 10 or 15 years older than his dad. Salt-tanned, pepper hair, sharp jawline, eyes that seemed to notice too much. He was supposed to be just another guest, someone stopping by to share a drink. But at that moment he wasn't just anyone. He was the only one who saw. Their eyes locked across the table. The boy, cheeks burning, lips pressed together so hard they hurt the man, gaze steady, unreadable, almost surgical in how he dissected the scene without a word. The laughter dimmed as if his presence shifted the air itself. No one addressed what had just happened, but the boy knew this man had walked in at the worst possible second, the second that revealed him as weak, humiliated, powerless. The boy's pulse hammered in his ears. He wanted to vanish, yet he couldn't look away. There was something in the man's expression, not pity exactly, not judgment either. It was something colder, sharper, like recognition, as if he understood the invisible bruise left behind by that cruel joke. The conversation resumed awkwardly, people forcing chatter to cover the silence, but the boy barely heard them. He could feel that gaze on him like a spotlight he hadn't asked for. His fork trembled in his hand, his throat tight with words he couldn't force out. This was supposed to be just another family dinner, another night of pretending. Instead, it became the night when his fod cracked under the weight of laughter. And worse, it became the night when someone else, a man who shouldn't matter, saw it happen. He told himself it didn't mean anything. That after tonight the man would forget what he saw, and he could crawl back into his quiet routine of surviving one day at a time. But deep down he knew the truth. Once someone witnesses you at your weakest, they don't ever truly forget. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, part of him didn't want this man to forget. If the birthday dinner had left scars, the days that followed only pressed deeper. It wasn't just the uncle's cruel toast or the stranger's laughter. It was the constellation of people orbiting his life, each one pulling him in directions he couldn't control. The first was his sister Emily. She was 20, only 3 years older, but carried herself as if she were 10 years wiser. Blonde, loud, magnetic, she was the center of every family gathering, the golden child who could do no wrong. She loved him in her way, but it was the kind of love that came with barbed edges. She teased him mercilessly, calling him sensitive when he flinched, rolling her eyes when he tried to speak. To her his quietness was weakness, and his weakness was something to be managed with sarcasm. Still, she wasn't cruel the way the others could be. Deep down she saw him, but she never defended him, and that silence cut sharper than any joke. Then there was his father, Robert, a man of rules and appearances, whose voice carried the weight of command, even at home. Robert had built his career in real estate, stern handshakes, cold contracts, and a reputation that mattered more than warmth. He wasn't violent, but he was distant, his affection measured in paychecks and lectures about growing up. At the dinner table, Robert had tried to brush off the uncle's toast, but not out of defense, more to avoid scandal, to keep the night pleasant. In his world, image mattered more than his son's humiliation. That was the moment the boy realized his father would never stand between him and the world's cruelty. The Uncle Tom couldn't be ignored either. Loud, brash, always drunk, he was the one who'd dropped the bomb at dinner. He enjoyed it, reveled in the discomfort he created. Tom had always had a way of sniffing out weaknesses and jabbing at them like open wounds. To him, the boy wasn't family so much as easy entertainment. The problem was that Tom lived only a few streets away, which meant his shadow lingered even after the laughter faded, but perhaps the most dangerous secondary figure wasn't blood at all. His name was Daniel, Emily's on-again, off-again boyfriend. He was tall, athletic, the kind of guy everyone admired on sight. But behind his perfect smile was cruelty, subtle and sharp. Daniel had a way of cornering the boy when no one was looking, whispering things meant to stick under the skin. "You're pathetic," he once hissed after a family barbecue, pushing him lightly against the garage wall, too quiet for anyone else to hear. "No wonder they laugh at you." Daniel didn't need an audience. His satisfaction came from the private destruction, the knowledge that no one would believe the boy if he ever spoke up. And yet Daniel played another role. He was connected to the older man, the same man who had walked into the dining room that night. Daniel knew him through work, through some vague overlap between families and business. The boy didn't yet understand the depth of that connection, but it meant trouble. Because if Daniel noticed the flicker of recognition in the man's eyes, if he sensed the silent electricity between the two, he would twist it until it bled. There was also his mother, Anne, though her role was quieter. She loved her son, of that he had no doubt, but her love was laced with fear. She lived in Robert's shadow, careful never to make waves, careful always to smile. At the dinner she had chuckled nervously at Tom's toast, not because she found it funny, but because she didn't know how not to. Her silence was complicity, and it taught the boy that sometimes love is powerless when fear is stronger. Together, these people shaped the stage. Emily, the sister who could never quite stand beside him. Robert, the father obsessed with image over truth. Tom, the uncle who thrived on humiliation. Daniel, the cruel manipulator who knew too much. Anne, the mother who loved but couldn't protect. And hovering at the edges, like a storm cloud that hadn't yet broken, was the older man, the one who had walked in at his lowest point, who had seen everything. He wasn't family, not exactly. He was an outsider, a guest, someone who should have had no place in the boy's private pain. Yet his presence connected these threads, his ties to Robert through business, to Daniel through shadowy social overlap. All of it meant he was just a silent witness. He was part of the machinery of this life, even if the boy didn't yet realize it. What made it worse was the way the boy couldn't shake the memory of that gaze. In the days after the dinner, while Emily laughed with her friends and Daniel shot him dagger, Miles. He kept seeing those eyes sharp, cold, impossibly steady. It was unbearable to imagine that a man like that had seen him humiliated, and yet at the same time it was intoxicating. Because sometimes the only thing more dangerous than being invisible is being noticed. After the dinner, the house no longer felt like home. Every room carried echoes of that laughter, every corner whispered his humiliation. He couldn't stand the way Emily looked at him with pity now, or how Daniel's smirk seemed sharper than ever. His father ignored him, his mother folded into silence. He was trapped in the cage of his own family. Which is why, when the older man extended an offer, he almost didn't think twice. The man's name was Mark Whittaker. He wasn't a blood relative, but had been a fixture in his father's professional life, for years a client-turned-friend, someone Robert often introduced at barbecues as a man who gets things done. Mark owned a property on the edge of town, a sprawling house set against the backdrop of dense woods, with a long driveway that cut through oaks like a private corridor. It wasn't ostentatious in the way some rich men flaunted their wealth. Instead, it was quiet, restrained, almost too private. Mark suggested the boy could stay there for the summer help with some renovations, clear his head, maybe pick up odd jobs. To Robert, it sounded like discipline dressed as opportunity. His son would be out of the way, under the eye of someone respectable. To the boy, it felt like exile disguised as kindness, but he accepted. Anything was better than suffocating under Daniel's sneer or Tom's jokes. The house was different from the suburban chaos he knew. It sat alone at the edge of a lake, the water black and still at night, mirroring the sky. Inside, the rooms were wide and echoing, with tall windows that seemed to watch him rather than welcome him. The first night he lay awake, listening to the creaks of the old wood, feeling the strangeness of being in another man's domain. Every detail reminded him he was a guest here, maybe even a burden. Mark himself was an enigma. He kept to routine's coffee at 6, phone calls that lasted hours, papers spread across his desk. He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't warm either. His presence filled a room, but not with noise. It was more like gravity, pulling everything toward him. When he spoke, it was measured, deliberate, as though every word was chosen with precision. At first, their interactions were minimal. Mark asked him to handle tasks fixing a fence, carrying boxes, trimming the hedges. The boy obeyed without complaint, though his body ached from work he wasn't used to. But underneath the chores was a strange electricity. Sometimes, when he looked up from the yard, he'd see Mark standing at the window, watching him. Not long, not obvious, just enough for him to wonder what was going on behind those eyes. The boy told himself it was nothing, that Mark was simply making sure he earned his keep. But deep down he felt it, that same flicker he had noticed at the dinner, the one that had unsettled him. It wasn't pity, it wasn't disapproval, it was something else. And as days passed, the isolation of the house began to change him. With no family to humiliate him, no Daniel lurking in corners, he found himself breathing easier. But in that silence, his thoughts grew louder. He thought about the gaze, the stillness, the way Mark's presence filled the air like a storm waiting to break. He thought about what it meant that his father had trusted this man with him, and what might happen if that trust was misplaced. The setting itself fed the tension. At night, the lake glimmered under moonlight, a perfect stage for secrets. The woods whispered with unseen movement, reminding him that they were far from anyone who could hear if something went wrong. The house, with its tall windows and locked rooms, felt more like a puzzle than a home. Every creak in the floorboards made him wonder what had happened here before him, and why Mark had chosen this place to leave alone. There was a paradox to it all. He felt safer here, away from his family's cruelty, and yet more vulnerable than ever. Because here he wasn't just a son or a brother or a target. Here he was simply himself, stripped of excuses, watched by a man who seemed to see everything. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the treetops, Mark called him over after dinner. "You'll be staying in the guest wing," he said, his voice low, his eyes holding him a beat too long. "But don't wander into the study. That's private." The boy nodded, but the warning lingered like an invitation. He went to bed that night restless, staring at the ceiling as shadows shifted across the walls. He couldn't tell if the unease was fear, curiosity, or something far more dangerous. All he knew was that his life had split in two, the one head left behind, filled with laughter at his expense, and this one the quiet, charged world of a man whose gaze felt like both a threat and a promise, and though he didn't admit it, even to himself, he was starting to want that gaze more than he feared it. It started with a storm. The day had been heavy with humidity, the kind that clung to the skin and made even breathing feel like effort. By evening the sky broke. Rain hammered against the tall windows of the Whittaker house, thunder rolling across the lake like cannon fire. The boy sat in the living room, curled into the corner of the couch, pretending to read a book he couldn't focus on. Every crack of lightning lit the room in silver, and each time he felt smaller inside that vast house. He heard Mark before he saw him, footsteps steady, unhurried, moving through the echo of the hall. When the older man entered, carrying a glass of whiskey, he didn't speak right away. He simply crossed the room, stood near the window, and stared out at the storm. His presence shifted the air, the way it always did. "You don't like storms." Mark's voice was low, almost casual. The boy swallowed, not looking up from the book. "Not when they feel this close. Storms clear the air," Mark said, sipping his drink. "They strip away what doesn't belong. Most people are afraid because they don't like being reminded how small they are." The boy finally looked up, caught by the way the lightning carved sharp lines across Mark's face. He seemed carved out of stone, calm in a way that felt impossible against the fury outside. "I don't like being reminded," the boy admitted quietly. Their eyes met, just for a moment, but it was enough. The silence that followed waste and empty. It was loaded, stretched thin like a wire about to snap. The book slipped from his lap, landing softly on the carpet. He leaned forward to pick it up, but Mark's voice stopped him. "Leave it." The boy froze. It wasn't a command exactly. More like a test. He straightened slowly, his pulse quickening, unsure why his body obeyed. Mark turned from the window, setting his glass on the side table. "You don't like storms," Mark said again, but this time his tone was different, quieter, more deliberate. "And yet you're here alone, in a house that doesn't belong to you." The boy's throat tightened. I didn't choose, I know," Mark interrupted. "But choice has little to do with it. Sometimes life puts us where we're meant to be, whether we're ready or not." He stepped closer, the floor creaking under his weight. The boy's breath caught. Every instinct screamed to move, to say something, to break the tension, but he stayed rooted to the couch, heart thundering louder than the storm. Mark stopped just a few feet away. His gaze locked on him, not cruel, not pitying, something harder to name. He reached down, picked up the fallen book, and held it out. Their fingers brushed when he returned it. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a shiver up the boy's arm, sharp enough to steal his breath. Neither spoke. The book rested between them like a secret. Then Mark leaned back, his expression unreadable, and walked away. He didn't look over his shoulder, didn't offer a smile or a word of explanation. He simply left the room, leaving the boy alone with the storm, his pulse racing as if something irreversible had just happened. And maybe it had, because in that fleeting touch, in that unbearable silence, the boy felt something ignite, not trust, not fear, but a dangerous hunger he couldn't control. Later that night, lying awake in the guest room, he replayed every second, the sound of Mark's voice, the brush of skin, the weight of his stare. He told himself it meant nothing, that it was his imagination, that Mark was only being polite. But deep down he knew better. The spark had been lit, and sparks, left unattended, have a way of burning the whole house down. The storm had ended, but its echo lived inside the walls. Noah couldn't forget the way Mark had touched his wrist, that night barely 2 fingers, yet it felt like fire he couldn't shake. Since then, silence carried weight. Every meal, every glance across the table stretched tighter, until one night it finally snapped. It happened in the living room. Rain misted against the tall windows, a soft drizzle returning like an afterthought. Mark had poured himself a drink, settling into the leather chair with a book. Noah sat on the couch, pretending to scroll his phone, but every nerve was tuned to the older man's presence. "Still awake?" Mark asked without looking up. "I couldn't sleep." "No," his voice betrayed him, too quick, too sharp. Mark closed the book. His eyes held him. "Nightmares again." Noah hesitated, then nodded. Stop replaying." "Breathe," Mark said. He stood, crossed the room, and lowered himself onto the couch beside him. The cushion dipped, their knees nearly touching. "Count it, in for 4, out for 6. Noah obeyed, chest rising, falling, rising again. Mark's hand hovered for a moment, then settled lightly on his shoulder. Not firm, not commanding just there, a grounding weight. Noah froze, every muscle trembling, not because he wanted to pull away, but because he wanted the opposite. When he finally exhaled, Mark's hand moved, fingers brushed the line of his arm, down to his wrist again, holding it gently, deliberately. The world shrank to that touch. Noah's pulse raced under Mark's thumb, and Mark felt it. He didn't let go. Their eyes met. Silence roared louder than thunder. Noah's breath stuttered, lips parting without words. Mark leaned closer, not enough to cross the line, but enough that the air between them burned. "You're shaking," Mark murmured. "I know." Noah's reply was barely sound. Mark's hand slipped away suddenly, leaving Noah gasping at the absence. "You should rest," he said, standing, voice rougher than before. He left the room, but the air stayed charged, humming with what almost happened. Noah sat in the dark, skin still alive where Mark had touched him. It wasn't a kiss, not even close, but it was more dangerous than one. Because now he knew, Mark had felt it too. The fragile moment shattered the next day. Daniel arrived, all swagger and cologne, dropping off an envelope and poison. "Nice setup," he smirked, eyes darting to the couch, where the blanket from last night still lay folded. Later, Noah's phone buzzed. "You're not the first. Ask about the last one." Attached was a photo of Mark with another boy, younger, standing too close. The thought festered until Noah couldn't resist. When Mark left for town, Noah found the key, unlocked the study. Inside, letters signed Tyler, desperate, confessional, and beneath them a check from Robert Easton. To Mark Whittaker, memo, summer arrangement. The floor creaked. Noah spun. Mark stood in the doorway. "You said it was private," Mark said. "You took his money." Noah's voice broke. "Am I just another project, another Tyler?" Mark's silence confirmed too much. Noah shoved past Himmenly to find Emily and Daniel entering through the front door. Emily pale, Daniel grinning. "Just checking in," Daniel said smoothly. "Safe here, kid." The word twisted like a knife. Then Robert arrived. His fury was a storm of its own. You were supposed to discipline him, not he cut off, but the accusation hung heavy. Mark stood firm. "What I gave him was protection, something you never gave." Noah's chest heaved. He held up the crumpled check-proof. Emily gasped. Daniel smirked. Robert's jaw locked. Noah ripped the paper into pieces, stormed onto the deck, and let them scatter into the lake. Mark followed, voice cutting like steel. "He is not a transaction." Silence swallowed the house. Even Daniel's grin faltered. Emily's eyes brimmed with guilt. Robert's power cracked at the edges, and Noah stood in the rain. Slick night, heart racing, knowing the truth had detonated, and nothing would ever go back. The pieces of the check still floated in the lake when Robert stormed back inside, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The house was a battlefield now, every silence loaded like a weapon. Noah stood near the glass, chest heaving, pulse refusing to slow. He had burned the bridge, and everyone in the room knew it. Emily hovered by the kitchen, arms wrapped around herself. Her voice cracked when she tried to speak. "Noah, you shouldn't have what?" Noah snapped. "Exposed the truth. Shown that I was nothing more than Dad's deal to get rid of me." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. Daniel leaned lazily against the counter, arms crossed, enjoying the spectacle. "Careful, kid. You sound ungrateful. Most people would kill for a summer getaway like this." "Shut up, Daniel." Noah hissed. Mark's voice cut through the air, low and sharp enough. Even Robert faltered at the tone. He rounded on Mark, fury boiling. "You think you're noble. You took my money. You hid behind your walls while my son turned into your project. I gave him dignity." Mark shot back. "Something you never gave." The words landed like a slap. Robert's face hardened, but he didn't reply. Instead, he grabbed Emily's arm and jerked his head toward the door. "We're leaving. Now." Emily glanced at Noah one last time, apology written in her eyes, but followed. Daniel stayed. Of course he did. When the door closed, Mark exhaled slowly, as if holding the house together with his breath. He turned to Noah, their eyes locked, too many emotions crashing between them. Anger, betrayal, longing. "You shouldn't have gone into the study," Mark said finally. "You shouldn't have let them buy my silence," Noah fired back. Mark's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, stopping just short of touching. The air thickened. "You don't know everything. Then tell me." Noah whispered, trembling, though whether from fury or want, he didn't know. The moment stretched unbearable until Daniel's voice sliced it. "Touching," he drawled, "really touching. Does Emily know you two are playing house out here?" Mark stiffened. Noah turned, his fury boiling over. Get out. Daniel only smirked. Not until I've had my fun. See, I know what this looks like, and I know who will pay to hear about it. He tapped his phone. One video, one post, and your little safe house burns to the ground. Mark's voice was ice. You want? Daniel's grin widened. Want I? The tension snapped like a whip. Mark lunged forward, not with fists but with presence, a step that forced Daniel back against the wall. For a second, Noah thought he would strike him. Instead, Mark leaned in, voice a growl only Daniel could hear. If you ever come near him again, I need words. Daniel's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. He slipped out with a mocking bow. Enjoy your summer, gentlemen. The door shut behind him, leaving the echo of threat behind. Noah's knees nearly gave. He collapsed onto the couch, hands shaking. He's not bluffing. Hell do it. Hell ruin me. Mark sat beside him, closer than before. His hand hovered over Noah's, then settled, firm this time, no hesitation. Then we don't give him the chance. The warmth of Mark's touch spread like fire. Noah looked up, meeting his gaze, and for the briefest heartbeat, the world shrank to just the two of M-Storm outside, Storm inside. Their faces drew closer, breath mingling, the line trembling, ready to break, and then headlights swept across the window. Robert's car, back again. Mark pulled away like a flame extinguished, mask snapping back over his face. Go upstairs. Now, Noah hesitated, torn between fight and flight, but obeyed. From the landing he heard voices. Robert's low growl, Mark's sharp replies, words he couldn't catch but tones heavy with threat. He pressed his ear against the wall, trembling. Daniel's laughter seemed to linger in the house long after he was gone. Upstairs, Noah stared at his reflection in the dark window. The boy, humiliated at dinner, was gone. In his place stood someone caught between two men, one who had betrayed him and one who could destroy him in a different way. And downstairs the war was only beginning. The night pressed in, thick and suffocating. Noah sat on the edge of the bed upstairs, staring at the shadows crawling across the floor. Downstairs, voices still clashed. His father's fury, Mark's steady defiance, two storms colliding under one roof. Every word muffled by walls, but every vibration carrying through the floorboards like aftershocks. He wanted to run, he wanted to stay. Both desires clawed at him until he could hardly breathe. The door creaked, and Emily slipped inside. Her face was pale, eyes red. You can't stay here, she whispered. Dad won't stop. Daniel won't stop. This will get worse. Noah shook his head. I can't go back either. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. For the first time her silence wasted pity it was fear. She left without another word, and the house felt emptier for it. Minutes later the door opened again. Mark, he didn't cross the threshold, only stood there, silhouetted by the dim light from the hallway. His voice was calm but carried weight. If you want to leave, I'll drive you myself, tonight, before this swallows you whole. Noah's throat tightened. And if I stay, Mark's eyes were unreadable, then you have to be ready for what comes next. Noah's heart pounded. Through the window the lake shimmered black, swallowing the pieces of the check head torn apart. Behind him was family that wanted to erase him. Before him was a man who saw him too clearly, maybe dangerously so, stay and risk burning in a fire he couldn't control. Leave and return to a cage already waiting. His breath caught. He realized both choices could destroy him. And still he had to choose.